Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Tangle YouTube channel. Today's debate is on Dylan Mulvaney and Bud Light. We're going to break down the controversy with one of the most divisive topics in America, trans issues. As always, we'll have views from the left and the right, and then my take. But first, the story. Last week, one of America's most iconic beer brands became the center of a culture war controversy after it partnered with a transgender influencer named Dylan Mulvaney. Bud Light sent Mulvaney custom beer cans with an image of her on them, and she then posted a video of herself online celebrating March Madness and her first year of girlhood or womanhood.
Hi! Impressive carrying skills, right? I got some Bud Lights for us. This month I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it.
In a matter of days, Mulvaney's collaboration with Anheuser-Busch drew criticism from conservatives. Kid Rock, who has become a right-wing influencer, posted videos of himself shooting cans of Bud Light with a rifle. Country music singer Travis Tritt is banning the beer from his tour. During a performance Friday night, a country singer named Riley Green dumped the words Bud Light from his famous song I Wish Grandpas Never Died, substituting them instead with Coors Light. Criticism about the partnership drew so much attention that the CEO of Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light's parent company, responded to the backlash. Brendan Whitworth said in a press release that the company never intended to be a part of a discussion that divides people. We're in the business of bringing people together over a beer, he said. This is not Mulvaney's first foray into controversy. She was addressed by the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh in a video earlier this year in which Walsh said this.
You are weird and artificial. You are manufactured and lifeless. You are unearthly and eerie. You are like some kind of human deep fake. That's what you are.
The comment drew criticism even from Walsh's staunchest allies on the right and from one colleague who quit the Daily Wire over the video. Full disclosure, I was actually part of that criticism. Walsh and I had an exchange on Twitter in which I criticized his remarks as cruel. Mulvaney rose to stardom after detailing her transition on TikTok. While her videos have been hailed as inspirational by her supporters, critics say she has caricatured women in her videos and worry her popularity will promote gender dysphoria among her youngest fans. Not long after the Bud Light video was posted, Mulvaney also shared a paid partnership with Nike. So that's the big story. Now, let's jump into some opinions about what happened. First up, let's start with what the right is saying. Many on the right criticize Mulvaney for caricaturing women and criticize Bud Light for misreading its customers. Some say Bud Light's partnership with Mulvaney is offensive to women. Others argue that Mulvaney is suffering from a mental illness that needs to be addressed. In the New York Post, Carol Markowitz said women deserve more than to be lampooned by Bud Light and Nike. Mulvaney hit prominence doing what appeared to be a sketch comedy bit, but actually wasn't. A TikTok series called 365 Days of Girlhood, in which the biological man Dylan transformed himself into a girl, Markowitz said. Mulvaney kicks off the first video of the series saying, I've already cried 3 times. I wrote a scathing email that I didn't send. I ordered dresses online that I couldn't afford. And when someone asked me how I was doing, I said, I'm fine, when I wasn't fine. The videos were like asking ChatGPT to write a script on womanhood that is deeply offensive but also unfunny, Markowitz wrote. What's the big deal? Well, ignoring it is what the large majority of the country were doing before women were recalibrated as birthing people, and suddenly no one could define a woman at all. In Spectator, Teresa Mull said she feels sorry for Dylan Mulvaney. I can't imagine the suffering of people who do not identify with the sex God gave them must experience, Mull said. Until recently, though, transgenderism was considered to be a mental illness, though the American Psychiatric Association now diagnoses transgender people as having gender dysphoria. Doing so does not eliminate the mental health afflictions such people continue to endure. It's pretty plain Mulvaney is a person in pain. We should speak up about Bud Light's campaign, not just because it damages our Judeo-Christian values, but because Mulvaney and millions of others are victims of a godless, empty, loveless culture. In Fox News, Vivek Ramaswamy criticized Bud Light for caving to the gender insanity cult. For a drink that was once a blue-collar staple of middle America, this isn't a winning sales strategy, Ramaswamy said. One of the goals of my candidacy for president of the United States is to close the gap between what people are willing to say behind closed doors versus what they say in public. In that spirit, here goes. Dylan Mulvaney might need mental health care, not endorsement deals. Ramaswamy argued that most trans people are suffering from mental illness, and he rejects the idea that it is humane to affirm their confusion. Meanwhile, the cult of gender ideology increasingly foists sexuality upon children with Drag Queen Story Hour, makes a mockery of women, can't answer what is a woman, and undermines female sports, Leah Thomas and countless others, by creating a zero-sum game where men with mental health disorders dominate at the expense of women. Alright, that is it for what the right is saying, which brings us to what the left is saying. Many on the left mock the right's outrage and criticize the response as transphobic. Some argue that Mulvaney is simply living her life like a normal person, and this enrages conservatives who want to control her. Others say Bud Light ultimately caved to the pressure and betrayed Mulvaney by not standing behind her. In MSNBC, Caitlin Burns, a trans reporter, said the outrage is backfiring. It was the latest outcry and a trend of conservatives getting upset at a company for, quote, going woke, and then, confusingly, buying more products made by that company just to destroy them in a performative social media post, Burns said. Conservatives want a world in which trans people like Mulvaney are ashamed of being trans and driven into privacy and obscurity, not hawking cheap domestic beer and sports bras on social media. But the truth is that trans people are normal people who have jobs, homes, and drink beers. Some of us wear sports bras and some of us don't. Some of us drink whiskey, and all of us deserve to live lives free of government or conservative control. And that's a fact that conservatives simply can't abide. In USA Today, Rex Hupke wrote a sarcastic piece entitled, "Why I Decided to Shoot All My Bud Light." The company I've long supported by getting day drunk on Bud Light recently caved to the absurd and liberal notion that we should treat everyone with kindness and respect by partnering with Dylan Mulvaney, who I'm told by Google is a transgender social media influencer, Hupke said. I learned about this through my primary news source, Kid Rock's Instagram page. I and my fellow truth-tellers took time away from our important crusade against the horrors of liberal cancel culture to encourage others to never ever drink Bud Light again, he said. Dare any of you to name a more noble quest than protesting a company by purchasing and then destroying its products while drawing vast, unpaid national attention to its brand? In Bloomberg, Ben Scott said Bud Light kicked a hornet's nest and then ran away. The reaction to this collaboration from some quarters was as predictable as a Trump tweet. This is less a story about trans rights and more about corporate bravery. Even Mulvaney's harshest critics must acknowledge that she is standing tall in a hurricane of hate, taking the invective with remarkable poise. In cowardly contrast, Anheuser-Busch instantly retreated into the shadows. First, they went dark on social media, then the CEO released a bizarrely convoluted and incongruously patriotic statement. It's hard to figure out what the company actually thinks about trans rights or Dylan Mulvaney, but it sure sounds like a complex issue being thrown under the bus. The action by the third most valuable beer brand in the world is worse than a gaffe. It's a betrayal by Bud Light, which sought to evolve and elevate its fratty image on the coattails of a trans influencer, but quit when the going got tough. Alright, that is it for the right and the left are saying, which brings us to my take. Just a reminder, my take is just that. It's my take. It's my opinion. If you have feelings about it, you want to fight me on it, you can leave a comment, like the video, share it, email me, whatever you want. I'll try to respond to it in the next video, but you can take it or leave it. So I recently answered a reader question about which issues I like writing about the least, and I mentioned trans issues in my answer. Not because I'm scared of the topic, but because, as this debate illustrates, so many people view it as some great battle between good and evil and seem so totally incapable of approaching it with any kind of rationality or attempt at empathy for the other side. Too often, debates about trans issues play out like this, on no substantive disagreements about a policy or law or psychology or medical science, but almost entirely on emotional culture war posturing online. So let me start with the easy stuff. Carol Markowitz said trans people have always existed and everyone was fine with it. That's either wishful thinking or revisionist history, but it's not realistic. The movement for more trans visibility would not have become a priority on the left if everyone had always been fine with trans people. Just a few years ago, gay Americans faced considerable backlash for gaining marriage equality and are still fighting for widespread acceptance. Whatever your feelings, the idea that everyone was or is fine with trans people is self-evidently untrue, as can be seen in the culture warriors on the left and the right fighting against and for the normalization of trans people right now. Melissa Burns, under what the left is saying, wrote that trans people just want lives free of government or conservative control, and that's a fact that conservatives simply can't abide. As one of the most visible trans pundits in America, Burns is well positioned to articulate the desires of trans people here, but she's overplaying her hand in describing the Bud Light boycott as an act of government or conservative control. Conflating boycott with actual government overreach into the lives of trans people is a counterproductive way to have this argument and makes real threats to the rights of trans Americans less clear. As stupid as I think it is for Kid Rock to go buy a few cases of Bud Light and shoot them up in his backyard with a rifle, he isn't violating anyone's rights by doing so. Writing about trans rights is especially fraught because the expression itself is vague and very obviously means different things to different people. It should not be complicated to say that transgender Americans deserve the same protection and equality under the law as all other Americans. Believing that they deserve dignity and freedom does not mean you have to think that gender-affirming care is always the right medical choice. It often isn't. Or that trans athletes should always be able to compete in divisions matching their gender identity, which should be situationally dependent. Or that disliking Dylan Mulvaney makes you a transphobe. It doesn't. I don't personally like Mulvaney, not because she's trans, but because her online personality, as with most influencers who are hawking products and posting about what they ate for lunch, can be grating and annoying. The conservatives who wrote about Mulvaney, including Markowitz, raised some big points. Her online personality is kind of a caricature of a woman, and I understand why many women might find it offensive. Mulvaney seems to be reinforcing the idea that crying several times a day and going on shopping sprees is what makes someone a woman. We should all be a little bit offended. Now, Mulvaney might find comfort in this over-the-top expression of femininity, but consider this. Before I even wrote this piece, I had two trans women who read Tangle write to me unprompted to criticize Mulvaney and express worries about the damage she's doing to trans women more generally. It's worth emphasizing that minority groups are not monoliths, and disagreements about trans issues exist within the trans community itself. To me, there is also something deeply ironic and silly about this whole boycott. I mean, aside from the obvious, like they sent Mulvaney a few beers, just relax. Bud Light has been woke for a long time, if we want to use the already overused term. For literally decades, Bud Light was the queer beer alternative to Coors, which had been accused of discriminatory hiring practices in the 1950s. Fast forward to today, and many conservatives publicly dumped Bud Light for partnering with Mulvaney, declaring their loyalty to Coors. I guess they were unaware that Coors has partnered with Caitlyn Jenner, a conservative activist and trans athlete. Is Coors okay because Jenner is conservative, or because she's a more acceptable trans person? Or maybe they simply didn't know. As I've said in the past, the US is possibly the most pluralistic society in the world, if not in human history. That's what we all sign up for by living here, but there is still an inherent tension in that. If you are someone who views trans people as evil or sick or unnatural, consider that you may actually already know a trans person, and really getting to know that person might change your perspective. Exposure is the best antidote to ignorance, fear, and hate. Similarly, if you think anyone who can't wrap their head around the idea of transitioning genders or preferred pronouns is evil and transphobic, I suggest you actually have a conversation with someone who has those misgivings. You might find, as I have, that their concerns are usually not rooted in hate or malice. My biggest takeaway from this episode is just how much more that kind of dialogue we need. Every day, I hope for a world with less tweeting, fewer TikTok influencers, and zero influential people whose first impulse is to shoot up a case of beer with a gun when they're mad. In that world, we might actually go seek out the people we don't understand or like. We could learn a bit more about each other in the real world, in real terms, with real dialogue, maybe even over a nice cold Bud Light, or maybe even over an actual beer. All right, everybody, that is it for today's episode. Like I said at the top, if you have thoughts about my take or what the left said or what the right said, feel free to leave something in the comments. I'll try and address it in next week's video. Otherwise, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and stick around. We'll be right back here next week with another video with some views from the left and the right, and of course, my take. Peace. Do it one more time. All right, everybody. That is it for today's pod. Nope, not a podcast. I'll try and reply to your comments sometime next week. And if you... All right, last one. And stick around. We'll be right back here next week. Peace.
That's so dumb. All right. That's what I got.